Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the latest mission from Starbase, Texas, along the U.S.-Mexico border. You're looking live at Pad 2 and a fully stacked and integrated Starship Super Heavy launch vehicle, the second of the version 3 model, and the first set to carry Starlink version 3 satellites on board. Time is currently T-minus 1 hour, 56 minutes, 50 seconds, and counting to the opening of a 90-minute window for the launch of this rocket and what will hopefully be a successful test flight, with SpaceX having a number of mission objectives in mind. I'm Will Robinson-Smith, reporter here at Spaceflight Now. It's very good to be with you here on this Thursday, July 16th, and of course, I'm not alone in this broadcast. We've got our full band of merry men here at Spaceflight Now, bringing you live coverage from down there at Starbase, as well as supporting here in Florida. Want to go back to our live views out west in Texas, as we're less than 2 hours from the launch of Starship version 3. We've got our Adam Bernstein on the ground, in addition to our friends over at Avid Space, who are helping support with live views here, including the one you're looking at right now, and view a little bit closer up of Starship and Super Heavy. Ship 40, Booster 20 are flying today's mission. This is, once again, a suborbital flight of the integrated launch vehicle, so no orbital mission for SpaceX just yet when it comes to the Starship program, but President and Chief Operating Officer Gwen Shotwell says if all goes well with this flight, you could see potentially an orbital launch of Starship maybe as soon as Flight 14, if not a little bit after that. Of course, the company has grand ambitions for getting its Starship up to orbit and what it will do with it once it does. Those include missions for customers around the world, their own Starlink version 3 satellites, their AI satellites called AI-1, as well as their obligations for the Artemis program. I mentioned at the end of our last broadcast, and for those of you who are joining us from that, welcome back. If this is your first broadcast with us, welcome in. We're going to be joined by a series of wonderful guests throughout the course of our coverage here today, and the first will be joining us here just momentarily. So settle in, grab a drink, grab a snack. We've got lots to cover with you when it comes to Starship version 3, and we've got some wonderful people to do it with. So stick right here, much more coming up. You're watching Spaceflight Now's coverage of Starship Flight 13. Time currently T minus 1 hour, 49 minutes, 3 seconds, and counting. As I mentioned, we've got a series of guests that we're going to be bringing in throughout the course of our coverage of Starship Flight 13, and we've got the first of those ready to go right off the bat. You remember him from our coverage of Starship Flight 12. He's back once again with us one more time, the Director of Research over at Payload, Mr. Jack Kerr, joining us up from the Big Apple there in NYC. How are you doing, my friend?
Good. We were just talking about how we need to get you to the Big Apple. You've only been one time. We got to get you up.
Just the one time it was a family vacation back in '05, so
Yeah, no
it's long
rockets up
overdue.
here. No rockets up here, but capital for the rockets is up here. So, yeah, good to be here, Will.
Exactly. You've got a stock exchange in Texas, got a stock exchange over
Yeah.
in NYC. So, yeah, definitely have to make it to one, if not both of those at some point. But we're glad to have you and your capital experience as part of the broadcast again, because the last time we talked, it was the road to SpaceX's IPO.
Right.
Now this is their first Starship launch on the other side of going public. So, I just starting there in that in between, there's been a lot of speculation about what this rollout would look like. Now we've had a chance to see financials, see market reaction. Want to get your 2 cents on what this first public period for SpaceX has been like.
Yeah. First of all, it was very exciting. It was a historic moment, both in general for the IPO world, but also for SpaceX, and to have one of the most valuable businesses in the world be a space business, I think is a real testament to how big this industry has gotten. But I mean, it was probably the most predictable IPO and month after the IPO that you can get. They IPO'd enormously successful, popped. And now I think it was as of yesterday and continuing today, their stock price has declined all the way down back to their IPO price and below, which happens at almost every IPO. Maybe you could talk, maybe it's 95% of them. So this is something that everybody was expecting, um, but yeah, we'll see. We'll kind of see where it goes from here. But obviously, there was a lot of investor interest to fund all the operations.
And this is the first time that investors are actually getting to see SpaceX launch a Starship vehicle. Obviously, there have been Falcon 9 rocket launches since the IPO happened, but how much more is at stake, if you will, or is, valuable by having SpaceX be able to showcase Starship, especially now that, the shine is off of the newness of version 3. This is their second bite at the apple, if you will. And, they've hopefully got a few more of the kinks worked out.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be I think it's gonna be fun. I don't think it particularly impacts the investor outlook. I think if there is a I think well I'll caveat that. If there is a 10 out of 10 launch, then that would give folks a lot of confidence that we're moving closer and closer to Starlink V3 fully operational deployment, and that can move up some forecasts. But a big kaboom, I don't think matters at all. I think folks kind of understand the story well enough, and also like as we mentioned on the last broadcast, this is the SpaceX story has moved well beyond a launch here or there. It's really about the AI business, um and like the comms business means a lot, and Starship means a lot. Uh, so we'll see how it goes, but I'm pretty confident that it's not going to have the biggest impact one way or the other.
And obviously, Starship being the engine, if you will, that makes both the AI piece of SpaceX and the version 3 Starlinks happen. Of course, one of the key parts of this mission is the fact that this is the first flight where they'll be deploying not just dummy satellites, but actual, real hardware for the version 3 part of the constellation. In your mind, how critical is it that SpaceX is now at this step, given what we heard from Gwen Shotwell last month and speaking to CNBC, the fact that they're wanting to get to orbital flights potentially as soon as the next one, Flight 14?
Yeah, I think it's great to see them start to deploy Starlinks this early. I kind of was expecting more of a fall time period. Obviously, these are only going to last for 20 minutes, but they it's a big deal. It's a big deal, and I think it gives confidence that in the next couple of months we're really going to start to go orbital and start to transition at least some of the Falcon 9 Starlink launches onto Starship. And I think that is part of the broader story, not just what happens with SpaceX and what happens in Starship and what happens in Starlink V3 is what happens with Falcon 9. If this is the basically the kickoff in earnest of Starlink V3 satellites launching from Starship, that means this is kicking off the transition from Falcon 9 to Starship. And without Starlinks, whether that be in a year or so, without Starlinks launching from Falcon 9, the economics of launching Falcon 9 missions just for customer payloads becomes far less attractive. So that is something the entire industry, the entire space industry, satellite operators are grappling with right now. What happens to Falcon 9 in the next couple of years?
Yeah, and we were just talking before we started rolling, and for folks that are unaware, Payload also does show up at the New York Stock Exchange, and so you've had a chance to talk to and talk about a lot of these space businesses that are either public or looking to go public, looking to be a part of this grander ecosystem. I wonder from the conversations that you and your colleagues have had, how they're kind of feeling about this moment now that we're, formally on the back half of 2026 and, getting close to the point where they can start to think about, okay, maybe I can get my payload on a Starship vehicle. Is it starting to feel more tangible for them, or is this still sort of a long ramp up to that possibility from
Yeah,
what you're hearing?
I think it's the opposite, Will. I think it's unease that we're here now.
Mm.
And it's unease that we've spent 5 years and $300 million building a satellite with a certain form factor to fit in a Falcon 9 fairing, and that might go away. And there's not, yeah, you could say Starship is a alternative, but if you're going to build to the Starlink Pez dispenser form factor, that means like upending those 5 years of manufacturing investment that you put into a facility and completely changing uh, what your satellites look like. And that on top of that, kind of I'll say uncertainty around when Starship is going to want to launch customer payloads and how that's going to happen, and if there's going to be a payload adapter and at what altitude. You can't really just stick Starlinks are going to be launched at a very low, V3s are going to be launched at a very low altitude that transporter missions would never go to because, satellites would just deorbit very quickly. So I think there's unease about it, particularly with rideshare. This is like there are Falcon 9 dedicated missions that commercial operators buy, that being Amazon Leo and some of the big geo players. But 95% of the ecosystem, the space startup ecosystem, the space ecosystem, um, flies on 4 or 5 rideshare missions a year. And that looks like it's going away. I think SpaceX doesn't, I think it's a hassle if you're SpaceX to organize these transporter rideshare missions, and it's unclear who's going to take the baton, or whether Starship can even take the baton to run these rideshare missions. After Falcon 9 kind of starts the rapid decline. Now you look at other next gen kind of rocket companies and say, hey, in 2.5, 3 years, can they get there? And I just put together a model on this, and like history will show that it is very hard to ramp up a new rocket program, and you can kind of almost guarantee a cadence of 2 launches and then kaboom, and then a one launch and then tweak and then and So I think it's a real dilemma, and I think I'm not sure exactly how it's going to unfold. There's a world in which it it just works out, whether that being Starship opens up or Falcon 9 kind of extends, or maybe New Glenn really does the improbable and ramps up very fast. Um, but it needs to be it needs to be figured out. SpaceX obviously is focused on their own internal payloads and will support the industry as much as they can. But it's not their number one priority to launch other customers' payloads.
Yeah, I think obviously one of the big sort of question marks in all this was what you just mentioned a second ago. Where does Blue Origin fit into this, pie of rideshare missions? And, once they get back to launching with New Glenn, the original 7x2 version, how soon can they transition into, these potentially multi-orbit, multi-customer rideshare flights? That's a big question mark since they've got a lot of demand from previously announced customers like AST Space Mobile that has been waiting to get back to launching with the New Glenn rocket. Obviously, with the Artemis program, seeing those first Blue Moon Mark One landers head to the moon. So there's a lot of folks that I imagine that Blue Origin is going to want and need to fly first before they even start to think about these grander rideshare missions. Although we have been hearing a lot from Tory Bruno about the development of their Blue Ring, so maybe it's not quite as far away as one might think. We'll have to wait and see on that, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, and they obviously have a lot to work through with their pad. But yeah, there's other rockets that should fly before New Glenn's return to flight, which would be Stokes Nova rocket and Rocket Lab's Neutron rocket and Relativity's Terran R, and maybe call that. Everyone will say end of 2026, but maybe just call it Q1 2027. But I think they're this time for sure. Like, I don't I think we're finally going to see a couple other rockets fly.
Yeah, it's getting quite active down on the old missile row over at the Cape. Want to go back to the idea of the ride share missions for SpaceX and the Falcon 9. We have heard within the last 6 months of some companies like ExoLaunch buying up a full Falcon 9 to do dedicated rideshare missions that are managed not by, unlike the transporter missions, you've got a variety of different companies manifesting payloads on board. But with the EXO 1 and EXO 2, which I believe are flying in 27 and 28, do you think missions like that could potentially incentivize SpaceX to extend the amount of time that it would hold these rideshare missions if it's not having to necessarily deal with a whole host of players, but can have one middleman like an EXO
Yeah.
launch or a Synopsys Space?
I wouldn't be surprised if that is the future of rideshare. These like independent brokers. And it just like there's always this debate, is rideshare profitable for SpaceX? It is. I'll put that debate to rest. It is, but it is very annoying to deal with 60 operators and different payload needs and whatever. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's what you mentioned, Exo Launch buying a Falcon 9 or COPS buying a Falcon 9 and then organizing themselves. The issue with that is rideshare economics get pretty brutal if it is not run by SpaceX themselves. So what I mean by that is, let's say SpaceX can launch a Falcon 9 rocket for $20 million cost. That's their marginal cost. That means they have to go out and sell, call it $30 million of payload that they put on, or capacity that they can put on their ship for a rideshare mission. Make $10 million profit. Okay, it's not great, but it works. If you're Exo Launch, you have to go and buy a full Falcon 9 for $74 million. And the only way to make those missions profitable is if you go out and, fill up that Falcon 9 with, call it $100 million of payload or of revenue that you get. So the effect of that is the rates to get on an Exo Launch led rideshare missions is going to be much, much higher than a SpaceX led transporter mission. So it's great. It's not. It's good because at least there is a way to get to space, but it's going to be a lot more expensive than what people are used to, have been used to for the last 4 or 5 years, and that just eats, that just eats into companies' bottom line. The whole ecosystem was really built off rideshare and predictable rideshare, and also low cost access to orbit.
Yeah, and that'll certainly potentially box out some of the smaller players. Your research universities, student-led
Sure.
missions. I'll be very
Yeah.
curious to see how those continue to persist with rideshare if the launch gets close to being prohibitively expensive. Do want to continue our conversation here in just a moment, but to give folks an awareness of where we are in the count, we're T minus 1 hour, 33 minutes, 13 seconds. The launch director for SpaceX is set to conduct its readiness poll at about T minus 50 minutes. So we've still got a little bit of time before we really get into the meat and potatoes of the fueling process for the Falcon 9 rocket. But just to let folks know that we're not ignoring the rocket over here, just enjoying our time in a conversation with Jack while we have him and before we are transitioning to our next guest. But Jack, with this mission that's coming up, Flight 13, we saw SpaceX conduct a number of milestones with the last one. They got Starship to the landing site that they wanted to, but they missed the mark with the Super Heavy booster. In your mind, what are going to be the most important things for them to try to get right this time around?
Yeah, I mean the obviously the boost back burn is going to be the big one, and I fully expect them to be able to nail that. They seem to do a good job of adjusting and upgrading after these little issues emerge from previous launches. So that is a big one. And then, as we talked about earlier, the Starlink V3 satellite deployments is a big deal and is going to be like a really important moment for the program. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that and seeing what kind of images we get of those satellites and how that goes, and if they're supposed to connect to the broader system while they're in space for 20 minutes. So if we can get confirmation of that as well, that would be pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I think from the Starship perspective, a getting back to making the booster and booster landing, at least over water, routine is definitely something to keep an eye out for, and hopefully they'll be able to do that.
Yeah, and for folks that are unfamiliar with the point that Jack just made, the 20 Starlink V3 satellites that are on board, because this is not an orbital mission, those are not being launched into orbit. So what is it currently, 10,800 plus satellites that are currently in low Earth orbit right now, this doesn't add to that total. They'll follow the same suborbital trajectory and demise along with Starship, and because they don't have the heat shield factor, they will burn up in atmospheric entry. But hopefully, with the timeline here, depending on where the cameras are situated on the six that have optical abilities to beam imagery back down to SpaceX, the primary goal is to look back at the Starship itself, take a look at the heat shield like we saw with the two that flew at the end of Starship Flight 12. But potentially, there could be some cameras that could look forward to the other Starlink satellites, and maybe we actually see the solar arrays deploy. So there could be a number of interesting visuals
Yeah.
and good visual data points that SpaceX gets with this, in addition to looking back at ship itself.
Yeah, and I hope they share that with us. It'd be cool to see these, as you're mentioning, Will, the Starlink satellites are supposed to elongate and open their solar arrays, so that would be pretty cool if we can have maybe a peek at that. I'm not sure if that's possible, frankly, but we'll see. And yeah, I think I mean, I think it's also important for those to see if that deployment mechanism for the solar arrays works, to again tweak things that don't work, to see if the connection and if they're able to tap into the broader network, and then go back to their satellite manufacturing facilities. And for the first time, to take learnings from these first 20 Starlink satellites and incorporate them into the next 20. But I do think this is like the start of a pretty significant acceleration, um, and the start of what we're gonna of Starship being operational. So it's definitely a big deal to finally get to deploy these satellites.
Yeah, and hopefully we get during the broadcast an update from SpaceX on what the manufacturing rate of the version 3 satellites is. Obviously, they've got
Yeah.
into a very steady clip with the V2 mini optimized satellites, but we really haven't heard a whole lot about the manufacturing side for the V3s. Presumably, there would be a lot of crossover and a lot of learnings that can be incorporated into it, but to get some stats and figures to back that up, I think would be good for
Yeah, that's
everyone.
a good. I'm very curious about that as well because it's like, how do you, if you're SpaceX, how do you play this? Because if you were to have ramped up your V3 satellite production last year or the year before, it would have been too early, and you would have been stuck with this large inventory of Starlinks that you couldn't deploy. So I am curious if they have even started like ramping production and if they are even thinking about slowing down production of the Falcon optimized Starlinks. So I think this is obviously going to be a big test to whether they can go forward on it or not. But that would be great if they provide any detail on that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really important thing, whether that comes out in this or a future broadcast or in filing to the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission now that they're a public company of where is the tipping point of ramping up V3 and ramping down
Yeah.
V2s, and maybe we start to see that really more viscerally with the number of Falcon 9 rocket launches, since the majority of those are dedicated to the V2 version of the constellation as we see them go into orbital Starship flights. But obviously, to your point, you need an orbital Starship for that to happen, and
Yeah.
that's still
Yeah.
somewhere out in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, Gwen Shotwell implied something to that extent where she, um, I guess, brought down the projection of how many Falcon 9s would launch this year. I think she said something like 145. Last year was 165. So
Hmm.
maybe in that forecast, they are projecting some of those Starlink launches to be Starship launches, and they can, they clearly this year clearly will be, or I should say last year clearly is peak Falcon 9 launch. This year we will start to see a slowdown and we'll see how dramatic that slowdown continues the following year.
And we're just about at the end of our time with you, Jack. But before we let you go, obviously you and the payload team have a number of different franchises and enterprises that you're involved with. But for folks that want to keep up with you and the work of your colleagues, where can they follow you? Where can they find what you've got in the hopper? And maybe if
Yeah, I
you have
mean
something you want to tease ahead to.
yeah, I guess you can find me on Twitter with my name Jack Core at on Twitter, but we have we my writing is at payloadspace.com. We have an editorial team with free news. I am behind a paywall with more analysis, research, but a lot of good stuff there. And then we also have a show at the New York Stock Exchange where we interview um, more of the startup community, the impulses of the world and apexes of the world and Stoke spaces of the world, to kind of cover the space and investing in space ecosystem. So, would love to connect with anybody, and would love to see everybody engage with our content and our work. But Will, this has been incredible to be on, and looking forward to this flight tonight.
As are we. Jack Core with Payload Space. Thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
You too. Bye bye. And again, that was Jack Core with Payload Space. Currently T-minus 1 hour, 24 minutes, 4 seconds and counting to liftoff of the Starship Super Heavy rocket that you see there with a very active tank farm in the foreground. For those who missed me mention it earlier in the broadcast, the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of prop load at about T-minus 50 minutes, so still got a little time between then and now. As we are continuing to see the clock tick down, I want to thank the more than 3,800 of you who are watching along with us live this evening. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to thank our moderators for being back with us once again to support this Starship launch coverage. Thanks to Jeff Hansen, Jules, and M. Teresa for continuing on with this again this evening. And if you missed my preamble back for the last SpaceX broadcast, the mods would certainly appreciate it if you followed our live chat rules. We ask that you please post your message in English so that they can respond as appropriate. Emojis are perfectly fine. We would just ask that you not create a huge block of them so it takes up a large chunk of the live chat space. We would also ask that you steer clear of topics of overt politics or religion, and please hold off on using all caps. Last but not least, we'd ask that you treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourself would like to be treated, and we'll all get along swimmingly. Taking a look at our live chat here, 1 hour, 20 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Want to thank channel member Master Dadbane for being with us now for 1 full year, who says, "Let's go Starship." Thanks to Will, all the mods, helpers, and crew. Thanks for your ongoing support with us with channel membership. As a reminder, membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and access to our members-only Discord server. So thanks to the support of folks like Cumulus Granatus, who's able to help answer folks' questions in the chat, as well as others like Quentin Kirby, Marco Gennari, MedTech. Our moderators, Mark P., and others who are still cruising on in to the broadcast right now. We appreciate all of our ongoing channel members. Those include as well Virginia Ramirez, who had a $2 super chat. Thank you, Virginia. Thanks as well to Mitchell Wilbur for a very generous $50 super chat. Really appreciate that. Who says, really hoping everything goes as planned. All systems working. As usual, great job, guys and gals. Thanks for what you do. Thank you for your support, Mitchell. And to Jeff Hansen with a $10 super chat, who says, "Go Starbase, go SpaceX, go Starship 13, Godspeed S40 and B20." Those denote the tail number for the ship upper stage, this being ship 40, and super heavy booster number 20. As SpaceX is working towards making a more airport-like operation for its Starship rockets, they are trying to get into a faster flow of things with each mission. As we saw with Flight 12, there's not intending to be a wet dress rehearsal of the fully integrated rocket on the day before launch, so SpaceX will, as you see here, progress into tanking operations if all continues to track as expected, and go ahead and launch at the opening of the window, barring a change to the T0. In service of that, they rolled the rocket out to the pad last night. You're looking at a time-lapse video from this camera from Avid Space. Stacking wrapped up a little before midnight. You can see here just, correction, this video, again, from Avid Space, showing the stacking wrapping up just before midnight, setting up SpaceX for its launch attempt today. Time currently T-minus 1 hour, 14 minutes and counting. Again, the SpaceX launch director will make the call on prop load beginning at the 50-minute mark, and we'll walk you through the timeline here in just a bit. Before that, though, the mission that is flying today, as far as the flight path, is going to look fairly reminiscent of what we saw during Starship Flight 12 as far as the takeoff and landings for both the ship and the Super Heavy booster. Given this handy-dandy aid from SpaceX, I'll walk you briefly through the timeline. As far as when launch occurs, right now set for 6:45 p.m. Eastern, following liftoff of the Starship Super Heavy integrated stack. Following hot staging, which will occur a couple minutes after liftoff, the Super Heavy booster is set to perform a controlled landing in the Gulf. That was where SpaceX ran into some trouble last time. We'll also see the deployment of, this time there will be Starship V3 satellites. SpaceX will perform an in-flight relight of one of the Raptor engines. And then, if all continues to go well, they will continue to test the performance of the heat shield with a splashdown in the waters of the Indian Ocean. That's set to take place about an hour and 5 minutes after the initial liftoff from Starbase, Texas. Like last time, they will have a series of buoys in the water set to capture imagery of the ship coming in for its aquatic landing. In addition, as we saw with Flight 12, there will be a series of, this time 6, of these Starship V3 satellites equipped with imaging capability, and SpaceX aims to capture video and imagery of the ship's heat shield, and potentially we'll see where they point the cameras, but perhaps we might be able to see some of the other Starlink version 3 satellites, potentially as they extend their solar panels following deployment. As we mentioned in our conversation with Jack Core with Payload, SpaceX will attempt to connect these Starlink satellites to the broader constellation, though, like with the ship, they will follow a suborbital path and ultimately demise and not be added to the orbital count, which right now stands at more than 10,800 up in low Earth orbit. Coming up in about 10 minutes' time, we'll be joined by our next guest here on the broadcast. We'll be joined by senior space editor over at Ars Technica, Eric Berger, someone with expansive knowledge of the SpaceX enterprise, having written 2 books about the company, Liftoff and Reentry. We'll be talking all about obviously the flight today, the road to this mission, but also the implications of where SpaceX is currently in the Starship program as we look towards its contributions not only to being able to fly customer missions, but also acting as one of the human landing system landers for the Artemis 3 mission and beyond. Speaking of the Artemis 3 mission, when the crew of the Artemis 3 flight was announced, we had the opportunity to travel to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. While there, we were able to sit down and talk one-on-one with the program manager for NASA's Human Landing System program, the piece of the Artemis pie that involves the two landers from SpaceX and Blue Origin that will ultimately be used to land astronauts in future missions on the surface of the moon near the South Pole. In this part of our conversation, I asked Mr. Steve Creech about the broad overview of the Artemis 3 mission from the lander perspective, since things are going to be a little bit different than the original vision of Artemis 3, which once upon a time during the last administration was aiming to be a landing of the booster, or a landing of one of the HLS vehicles, originally Starship, on the surface of the moon. Now Artemis 3 is a low Earth orbit mission. And as we're talking, or as you're hearing this answer, I would direct you as well, while you're listening to him, look towards the tower, and you can see a little bit of venting there as SpaceX is getting close to the point in which it's going to be loading liquid oxygen on board the ship upper stage. And so here's part of our conversation while you look at the tower, listen to the words of HLS Program Manager Steve Creech.
All along, we had planned for each Blue Origin and SpaceX that they were going to do what we call an uncrewed demo, to go take their lander, land on the moon, demonstrate that landing piece. What Artemis 3 does for us is the other piece that we really want to test is the interaction with Orion and the crew systems. And so what this mission is going to do is allow Blue Origin will launch first, a test vehicle with actually a fully outfitted first version of their crew cabin, docking adapter. Then Orion will launch, they'll dock and test, be able to demonstrate that docking, demonstrate crossing the hatch, and then SpaceX will launch the Starship, and we'll also do a rendezvous and docking with Starship. So an exciting new mission, and it really fills a gap that we had in our previous plan. We had the uncrewed demo, and we had tested out SLS and Orion, but now we get that first test of them together. It's still a little bit in trade, but I would, if I had to guess, I mean, we're looking at both options, both Starbase in Texas and the Cape. There are some benefits to the Cape. So I think you'll likely see Starship launch out of the Cape. And yes, so the last launch, you'll have a Blue launch with their test vehicle, then SLS and Orion off of 39B, and then likely Starship off of 39A.
It's going to be an exceedingly busy launch cadence in that roughly 2-week period during which those 3 rockets are set to fly. First, as planned, Blue Origin's New Glenn, then SLS, and then finally, as you heard, Starship. Currently, the plan, as you heard him at the end there, is probably to have Starship for the Artemis 3 mission launch from Florida, but they haven't entirely ruled out the possibility that the Starship for that mission would be flying from here at Starbase. time now just about T-minus 1 hour 40 seconds and counting as SpaceX is getting closer and closer to the opening of a 90-minute window to launch Starship Flight 13. For those of you just joining us, this is the second time that SpaceX will launch version 3 iteration of this ship and super heavy launch vehicle. Like with Flight 12, we're looking at another suborbital mission for this launcher, and potentially, if things go well, SpaceX could be targeting orbital flights maybe as early as Flight 14, but we'll have to wait and see how things go today and the data review thereafter. But speaking of reviewing things and getting up to speed with what's going on with SpaceX and Starship, I mentioned just a little bit ago that we've got a series of wonderful guests joining us throughout the course of the coverage, and our next guest is joining us now live, Mr. Eric Berger, Senior Space Editor over at Ars Technica. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Hey, it's great to see you again, Will.
Good to see you. And, as we were talking about a second ago, this is a big mission for SpaceX, just the second time they've launched version 3. We haven't had the chance to really talk about SpaceX and Starship since Flight 12 in good detail. Just wondering your thoughts on that last flight and how you're feeling going into this next one.
Well, it was good to see Flight 12 largely be a success out of the box, particularly the performance of the upper stage, and that gives you some confidence. I think that this flight is going to go well. I think my baseline expectations for this flight are that it's pretty nominal, both the first and second stage performance, and that's obviously really critical so that they can get flying the vehicle more quickly. Let's face it, Will, the last couple of years, particularly 2025, was a really, really difficult year for Starship. I think they maybe took more steps back than forward. They certainly had a lot of learning experiences. Hopefully those lessons have been put to good use, and now they're going to enter or approach a more operational cadence with this vehicle. And today's test flight will go a long way. Like, if things go well, then I think they're really set up for success in the second half of this year. If there's a significant problem, then that's going to be a really big step back.
And just to also take a step back for us, I mentioned Eric is the senior space editor over at Ars, but it's been covering the space program for quite some time. And you might see on my bookshelf behind me, author of Liftoff and Reentry, the stories of SpaceX's early years and really getting through the Falcon program to where it is now. And so, Eric has had a lot of opportunity to talk with folks, deeply embedded currently and formerly at SpaceX, and so is well versed on where the company is now, what the expectations are for this mission. So, with that in context, one of the things I think obviously we're hoping to see improve from last time to this time is the super heavy boosters' ability to perform the boost back burn, which for folks that hadn't had a chance to read the rundown of what happened with Flight 12, the startup sequence for the ship upper stage kind of knocked the booster a little bit from the orientation it was supposed to be. What's your feeling going into this mission of, if that's been sort of ironed out and we're looking to see a performance of the booster more akin to the last few flights with version 2?
I mean, the reality is that for most of the Starship missions to date, the first stage super heavy has performed pretty well. There haven't been major separation issues, so I would imagine that there were some, that was obviously an unexpected performance issue, and they'll have addressed it pretty comprehensively. So again, I think that the first stage will do well, and I think it should give them a lot of confidence. I mean, a majority of the cost of the Starship rocket is in the first stage with all those engines, and so I think they're pretty close to actually nailing reusability with the first stage, and that's obviously a huge win for the program.
And last time we saw Starship fly, the NASA administrator Jared Isaacman was down there. He did a flyover on his jet with I believe it was just one day into Matt Anderson, his deputy administrator's tenure, so getting a good view both literally and figuratively of what NASA and its partners have in store. This time around, probably won't see the administrator there in person, given that he's just returning, or maybe has already returned from his time talking with the Russian counterparts over at Roscosmos. But this mission obviously has a lot of important implications on the road to the Artemis 3 mission, Eric. What do you think is going to be sort of NASA's focus as far as what they're watching for with this flight?
I think just like us, they're watching to see how this test flight goes. The reality is that SpaceX has to get through a lot of gates before they can start really contemplating landing Starships on the moon. And really the first of those gates is getting Starship flying into orbit frequently. And so if this flight is successful, as you said, Flight 14 has a pretty good shot at going orbital. And once they can start flying orbital, if they can start increasing the launch cadence of Starship, they can start ticking off some of these milestones that they have to go. So NASA's very eager in seeing success today, and I do not think Administrator will be down there. He got back from Kazakhstan yesterday, I believe. Matt Anderson got to go on that trip as well, so I guess it's good to be Jared's deputy. Get to fly around the planet and do cool stuff. But I think they're going to be watching. Well, I know they're going to be watching very closely.
And we've got a clip actually from the last time that we were over in Houston. Eric is based there, but when the Artemis 3 crew was announced, we showed a clip from part of this conversation earlier, but we spoke with Steve Creech, who's the head of the Human Landing System program, and the clip that I want to play for our audience and for Eric right now is a bit of an overview of the critical design review and the road to some of the uncrewed landing demonstrations that both SpaceX and Blue Origin have to accomplish before they're able to fly with humans on board. So let's go ahead and play the clip, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Blue Origin and SpaceX, we're expecting critical design review next year. They're both into fabrication. Of course, SpaceX is building Starships. They have not started. You will see later this year, they're actually starting building the next test that they will do for us. We call it propellant transfer demo. Well, they'll launch one Starship up and then launch another one to chase it and actually demonstrate transferring propellant in orbit. So that, and then later this year, earlier next year, they'll be building the actual uncrewed demo vehicles, which we're expecting in 27. Blue Origin is just starting production. They're again pretty mature in their design, and they're actually now starting production of the test article for Artemis 3 and the uncrewed demo hardware, literally this month.
Gotcha. And for the uncrewed landing demonstrations, obviously those would happen sometime after all of the final fabrication is done. Would that be in, I guess, the back half of 2027 for both, or is that still being fleshed out?
Yeah, we're targeting end of 27, early 28 for both of those. We're expecting right now SpaceX will be in the end of 27 and Blue Origin will be the beginning of 2028 to do that uncrewed demo mission.
So a number of critical milestones coming up over the next 2 years. Eric, bringing you back in, you hear all those dates. I mean, we've seen quite a bit of shuffling of timelines over the course of the Artemis program. How practical do you feel like those are versus where we are now with what we know about these two critical programs?
Yeah, apologies for my dog there. I don't think the dates are particularly realistic. Let's walk through it, Will. You and I are pretty knowledgeable about this stuff. So we got the next. They've got to get to orbit, and then they've got to be able to launch Starships kind of back to back to do the propellant transfer test, which is a huge test. NASA's been waiting on that for a couple of years now, and if that test can be done before the end of this year, I would be super impressed. I wouldn't rule it out, but that they're going to get a lot of valuable data from that in terms of loss rates of propellant. I don't think we know how much propellant they're going to lose during the transfer process. And so obviously during the storage, you're going to lose some as well to boil off. So yeah, that's step number one. And then for sticking with SpaceX, if you want to contemplate an uncrewed demonstration landing on the moon, we're talking 12 to 15 to 18 refueling launches, like quite a few, right? And you know, to do that by the end of 2027, when SpaceX is also going to want to start launching Starlink V3 satellites this year and next year. They're going to want to start launching orbital data center prototypes next year. You know, I just don't see the launch cadence unless they really hit an inflection point soon where they're going to be able to do that kind of a mission anytime in 2027. So we'll see. Optimistically, I'd love to see it. As for Blue Origin, you know, they're obviously not launching before the end of this year. That's their target, to get 7-2 back in flight. I don't think I know that for the current plan for the crewed landing for Blue Origin on the moon requires 4 launches of the 9x4 variant of New Glenn. So this is the larger, more powerful version of New Glenn, which there is still in development. I don't know if they could do an uncrewed demonstration with the 7x2 rocket, but you know, that is going to require multiple 7x2 launches or 9x4 launches. And again, you know, they're going to increase their cadence once they get flying again. But I don't see them getting to that high of a cadence. So, you know, I would consider those dates green lights to Malibu or aspirational, rather than sort of something I'd write down in pen and paper.
Maybe a pencil with a nice new eraser next to it.
You'd want to have one of those 3rd grade big pink erasers right next to it, ready to go. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know, it spoke with one of the HLS folks before the Artemis II launch, and at that point, I had asked Ken Shinaki, the deputy program manager, you know, how many refilling flights are you anticipating for, you know, the mission, you know, to send this uncrewed demo to the moon. At that point, it was still, you know, an unknown, or, you know, hadn't been pared down. But, you know, as you mentioned, Eric, you know, we've heard anywhere from 15 to 18 or more, and, you know, you're going to have multiple towers in sync, you know, working together to make that happen. And you've got a newly public company that's going to want to see, you know, profit turning missions, whether that be, you know, AI satellites, Starlink V3s. You know, so obviously there's a big question of how much is SpaceX going to be expected to slot aside for the Artemis program versus the missions that will actually make them money. I think that's a
great point.
question.
I mean, Artemis is a prestige mission at this point for SpaceX, not really a money maker, you know, in the near or long term. And their prioritization is a great question. Now, I will say, it was kind of negative there. I will say that I do think NASA has the right leadership in place that really understands this problem and is attacking it very aggressively. So, like, I don't think anyone is stalling here, right? I think everyone is working through these problems as quickly as possible. And you know, the NASA leadership, you know, has told the company their number one concern was rendezvousing with Orion in NR8, near rectilinear halo orbit. And so NASA got rid of that requirement, right? And so SpaceX is now going to be flying Starship from low Earth orbit with Orion at dock to it. So that may cut down on some tanker flights. You know, Blue Origin is probably going to do stuff in a lower lunar orbit. And you know, everyone is rowing the boat. It's just that the boat still has a long way to go to get there.
And speaking of the rowing process, as we're looking at the pad 2 over there, currently T-minus 46 minutes, 55 seconds, you can see the big vent from the heart of the tower there, as presumably the SpaceX launch director is now given the go-ahead for the start of prop load. It'll begin with the locks on the ship upper stage at around T-minus 37.5 minutes, followed shortly after by booster locks. So things seemingly continuing to progress towards the opening of the window, which would be good to see them not have to delay too far into this 90-minute window. But if it does come down to it, like we saw with Flight 12, they can hold at that T-minus 40-second mark for about 8-10 minutes or so. So not like a Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy, where once the fueling begins, they're locked into that T0. Starship does have some wiggle room, and so we'll be watching for any potential stalls at the end of the countdown timeline here.
it'll be interesting to see when they're really pushing for performance on the vehicle, whether that changes when they get to orbital missions and sort of they becomes like Falcon 9 where you load the propellant and then you've really got to go, or else it starts warming and you're losing performance pretty rapidly. It's just as warm in South Texas as it is in South Florida or the Florida coast.
Yeah, it's certainly warm and muggy. It's very typical Florida July late afternoon here. It's just about 6 o'clock here on the East Coast, 5 o'clock where Eric is in Texas. So warm, muggy, perfect day to fly a rocket.
Indeed.
One of the things that you and I hadn't talked about specifically with this mission is the fact that this is flying V3s for the first time. I mean, we sort of went past the implications of SpaceX needing to start launching these as part of their revenue-making venture. But with this first flight carrying them for the first time, how critical is that in your mind that they are at this milestone, even though this is still a suborbital mission? They're not launching them to orbit, but trying to connect them to the broader constellation.
I don't think it's that critical. I think
Okay.
it's a situation where they had sort of some satellites ready to go, and these are maybe prototypes. And they're going to get some useful data, and they're like, well, these are not probably going to be operational parts of the constellation, but we'd like to test certain parts of them that we can test in very low Earth orbit, VLEO. And so I think they sort of chucked them on there instead of the Starlink satellite mock-ups or prototypes they'd been using before. And so they're going to get some interesting data, but again, the long pole here really is the performance of the Starship vehicle. I think we can have some pretty good confidence that they've been building Starlink satellites now for a decade. They've built 10,000 of them. These are obviously larger, more powerful, more complex versions, but at the end of the day, they're kind of scaling up an existing technology. So I think it was like a nice to have part of the mission, but again, like what you really want to see is that first stage nail its performance envelope, come back to Earth, and the second stage not have any anomalies like we saw with version 2 of the booster. So again, for me, it's really the Starlinks are going to provide some great views of the ship in flight, but it's all about the performance of the vehicle.
Yeah, data elsewhere, the nice to haves in the middle of the venture. Obviously, the relight of the Raptor in space was something they were unable to accomplish last time. Another engine performance box that they need to tick before they try to launch this thing orbital. Got to be able to deorbit it.
That's exactly right, especially because Starship is so much larger than other things put into orbit that you really got to be confident that you can bring it down safely, whether that's disposing it of in the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean or somewhere else, or catching it back at Starbase. So yeah, it's you got to have that data, performance data, to show the FAA that you're ready to fly safe.
Circling back to the Artemis 3 mission for just a second, when it was announced that the vehicles that were going to be flying, you've got sort of a midway point on the Blue Moon Mark II, and then the version of Starship that's flying is even closer to what we're about to see today, just with a docking adapter up front. Was that surprising to you that it was going to be basically an off-the-line Starship with just a slight modification, as opposed to a version of ship that had some kind of habitable volume that the crew could enter?
I think it is interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, I think NASA went to both contractors and said, hey, if we flew Artemis 3 in the second half of 2027, what would you have ready to go? And SpaceX said, well, we're trying to do all these different things. HLS is one of our priorities, but it's one priority among many. We could have a Starship off the line. We put a docking adapter on it, and you could dock with it and see how it sort of, and that is important. Like, you want to see how the much smaller Orion vehicle performs when it's stacked or in tandem with Starship, and how whether that can fly and remain oriented as a put together.
Yeah, I think we've actually got a graphic of that, Stephen, if you're able to bring that up in the slides of what Eric was just talking about, Starship docked with Orion in low Earth orbit. That's able to be pulled up. Yeah,
and to be clear, my understanding is that Orion will be propulsively flying that the whole time, so it's not like they're going to fly Starship. I think there is some logic to this, though, and I understand where NASA's coming from because, SpaceX has done lots of crewed missions in low Earth orbit and has some pretty good experience with life support, whereas Blue Origin, has not. They've never really operated spacecraft in orbit. They have some limited life support experience with New Shepard. That's a suborbital mission, obviously very different than what's being contemplated here. And so I think that it's super important for NASA to get some operational confidence in the Blue Moon vehicle, even though it will be not the same as the ultimate Blue Moon lander, and some confidence also in sort of working with Blue Origin engineers. I mean, we saw this with the with Cargo Dragon and then Crew Dragon and NASA. Like, you wanted those teams at the two companies to be able to work together, and so it's going to be very important to see how that goes, in addition to how the hardware in space. So I think really the linchpin of Artemis 3 is actually the test vehicle from Blue Origin, to help them really get operational experience.
And looks like we're getting close to the end of our time with Eric. So just a couple more points before we let you go and enjoy the countdown to launch. As we just saw, it's going to be quite staggering seeing little Orion next to this massive Starship, and as you mentioned, the interface between those two software systems is going to be really key.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was always the plan, was for those two to link up. The newness of this all is Blue Origin's lander joining up with Orion, which will both be in a different orientation vis-a-vis the lander coming in from the side as opposed to the top for Starship.
Yeah, and my understanding in talking to the companies is that the restrictions around Orion in terms of propulsion plumes, proximity operations are pretty stringent. I don't want to say the vehicle is finicky, but certainly there's some pretty stringent requirements, and so it's going to be a real challenge to get through that. It's not like you can just push a button and have Starship go up and dock with Orion. There's the interaction is actually very complex, and so NASA and the companies will learn an awful lot from this mission, even if it's perceived as being only in low Earth orbit, and only docking Orion with Starship and not going in the vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Nikki Fox made a point during the Artemis 3 announcement to say that they were going to be studying the environment around Orion, and presumably a big piece of that would be when they're in proximity and docking to those vehicles to see what that plume interaction is going to be like with two very different architectures. Before we let you go, Eric, obviously you and your colleagues over at ours and our old friend Stephen Clark always have a lot of things in the hopper. First off, where can folks follow you, find your work, and what do you got in the hopper coming up in the near future? What you working on?
You can find me at Ars Technica, online website devoted to science and technology news. Just published a major piece trying to estimate costs for 1 million satellite orbital data constellation if SpaceX wanted to deploy that. That was a major undertaking. But I gotta be honest, Will, I'm going on vacation next week. It's the 1 week a year I unplug fully, so I don't have anything in the hopper just immediately. I actually you'll be familiar with this because Anil Menon's story. I just published a long story on his journey to space. I don't think the public pays a whole lot of attention to the astronauts that launch to orbit these days, because it happens often, especially those that go from Russia. But he and his wife have such a phenomenal story, finding out within a couple of weeks of one another that they were both going to space after not thinking they ever would, and now him launching earlier this week. I think he had a phenomenal story. I'm just so happy for him and for his family.
Yeah, from NASA to SpaceX, back to NASA, and off to orbit for the both of them. And it's they're a power couple to be reckoned.
They are a power couple, and they're just genuinely great people. So it's really fun to see those kind of people have success, and they're the kind of astronauts you just really want to root for.
And for those unfamiliar, Anil's wife Anna Menon previously went to orbit with Polaris Dawn. Currently one of the NASA astronaut candidate class of 2025, so will be eligible to fly as a NASA astronaut in a couple of years as we're getting towards the end of the International Space Station and Artemis is raring to go. So maybe we'll see Anna on the moon after she, was one of the 2 women who was the furthest to fly from Earth before, of course, Christina Cook just smashed that record.
She did.
Eric Berger with Ars Technica, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Will. Have a great launch.
Thanks, you too. Always good to see you. And we've got a confirmation of prop load in my ear. So things progressing well with about 35 and a half minutes remaining on the clock to the launch of Starship Flight 13. Time now T-minus 34 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. For those of you just joining us, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starship Flight 13 mission. The second time SpaceX is set to fly its version 3 rocket. Second time they're launching one of their Starship vehicles from Pad 2 there at Starbase. We should be getting additional views courtesy of SpaceX coming up here in the next couple of minutes or so. We certainly appreciate the more than 10,000 of you who are watching along with us live today. If you haven't already, be sure to click that like button and share the stream to allow some more folks to find this live launch coverage. SpaceX, as mentioned, has confirmed their prop load is underway. Also noted that weather looking good for today's test flight. Just 33 and a half minutes remaining before the launch, where we are in the fueling process. As a matter of fact, looks like at this point in the count, SpaceX is loading propellant on board both stages of the Starship Super Heavy rocket. Began with ship locks load at around T-minus 37 and a half minutes, with booster locks flowing about 30 seconds later. At T-minus 35 minutes 25 seconds was when the liquid methane, the fuel on board the booster, began to load, and most recently, just past the 35-minute mark, was ship fuel load getting underway. So things progressing smoothly right now for SpaceX as they get ready to fly this mission. As the sun starts to set, you can see with the color tone here, we're getting to golden hour along the Texas Gulf Coast. Progress continues on re-outfitting Pad 1 there, as SpaceX will need eventually the use of both towers when it comes to orbital launches and catches of the ship and boosters. SpaceX building a couple of towers here over at Space Launch Complex 37 and a tower at Pad 39A as well. You're looking at some drone video from SpaceX as their broadcast is getting underway as well. coming up, the next major milestone on the road to launch for SpaceX will happen at T-minus 21 minutes 30 seconds. That is the chill down of the 39 engines across the vehicle, the 33 at the base of the booster, and the 6 on the ship upper stage. Those are 3 vacuum engines and 3 sea-level Raptor engines. Is an aerial view of Pad 2 there down at Starbase. You can see how close this facility is to the coastline, and the road that runs along it is a public road. So when SpaceX is not in the process of doing a static fire test of its vehicle or performing a launch, the road is open to the public, and you can see for yourself what it's like down there at this rocket launch facility and rocket factory a little bit further down the road. You can see the frost line starting to build both on the Super Heavy booster as well as the ship upper stage as SpaceX continues on the road towards launch today. The ship upper stage has a propellant capacity of about 1,600 tons. On the Super Heavy booster, that's 3,600 tons. Looking at a tight shot of the quick disconnect there on booster 40, and a look at the inner stage. Notably different than the inner stage that has flown on previous Starship flights. This inner stage remains fixed to the booster as opposed to being jettisoned. Here's a look at the percentage of the fuel loading right now. As mentioned, prop loading on all 4 propellant tanks across the vehicle. SpaceX's Dan Hewitt noting that they are targeting a launch at the opening of the window. Whether 90% go and winds looking quite acceptable for this launch. Range looking good as well. As we're waiting for the next fueling milestone, let's go ahead and take a listen into SpaceX's Dan Hewitt for just a quick recap of Flight 12.
90 degrees. We've modified that startup sequence, made it more robust to flip in the right direction. Super Heavy attempted its boost back burn. 5 engines experienced issues when attempted to relight, so we had an early end to that. We made some hardware modifications to improve relight reliability and updated our alarms and aborts. That booster attempted a landing burn as it approached the Gulf. That was unsuccessful, and it ended its flight with a hard splashdown in the hazard area. Now, while that was happening, Starship made its ascent into space. About 40 seconds after stage step, though, we lost one of those 3 Raptor vacuum engines. Still able to demonstrate our engine out capability, reach the planned suborbital trajectory. We've made some hardware operational changes on this flight and have some additional reliability improvements coming in the future. Once in space, Starship was able to deploy all 20 of the Starlink simulators, 2 modified Starlink satellites that got these brief shots of Starship in space, which was dope. We skipped the in-space burn due to engine issues, but then Starship got ready to re-enter the atmosphere. It was able to do a flap stressing test and did the maneuver to mimic the trajectory that future missions returning to Starbase are going to fly. Then it got to the pre-planned splashdown zone in the Indian Ocean where we had drones and buoys ready and waiting. After the Raptors turned on for a flip, landing burn, Starship was in the water, and Flight 12 was in the books. So, a lot of excitement, a lot of firsts, a lot of learnings. All that set us up for round 2 today. Just getting to a launch day comes with a bunch of hurdles, a ton of problems to solve, a million little stories. Here's just a quick peek into one of those stories that was on the path to Flight 12 that we featured in the second episode of our ongoing documentary, Starship.
And we're going to go ahead and mute that real quick, as this clip does include what is likely copyrighted music, and we don't want to incur a YouTube strike. Time currently T-minus 25 minutes, 8 seconds and counting, though, where we are in the count. SpaceX getting ready to perform the engine chill on the 39 engines across the vehicle. Like with a Falcon 9 or a Falcon Heavy, that will involve flowing a little bit of liquid oxygen across the turbo pumps to protect them during the startup sequence from thermal shock and damage. You can continue to see the visual signs of fueling progress on both ship and the Super Heavy booster. Given the steel skin of the rocket, it's quite prominent seeing the frost line of both the liquid methane and liquid oxygen tanks. Taking a look at across the various views we have of the launcher here today, this particular camera from our friends over at Avid Space, but we do have our Adam Bernstein up on the rooftop as well. Oh. Correction, this is actually one of our Adam Bernstein, his wide camera view. We also have a tight tracker. So you can see, though, quite a bit of haze from this perspective. But once Starship starts climbing up off the pad, it will be much easier to track with our rooftop tracker here today. So lots of good views with which to showcase the Starship Super Heavy vehicle once it does take flight in about 22 minutes and change. SpaceX is targeting the opening of the launch window today. So looking for flight, if all continues to progress well, at 5:45 p.m. Central Time, 6:45 p.m. Eastern Time, 22:45 UTC for those around the world. taking a look at a breakdown or some graphical additions highlighting the Starship and Super Heavy launch vehicle. The booster stands at 72 meters or 236 feet in height. You're looking at the Raptor 3 sea level versions of the engines. Each engine has a diameter of 1.3 meters or about 4.2 feet. Each of the Raptors can produce about 250 tons of thrust. Taking a look there at the inner stage at the 3 grid fin design for the Super Heavy booster, and the inner stage, also referred to as a hot stage adapter, which stays affixed to the vehicle, unlike with the previous iterations, which was deployed following hot staging. Starship upper stage is 52 meters or 171 feet in height, with a diameter of 9 meters or about 29.5 feet. A version of ship upper stage, very much like the one you see here on your screen, will be outfitted with a docking adapter, where it will dock with the Orion spacecraft during the Artemis 3 mission. Let's go ahead and listen into this description of the Starlink V3 satellites that will be flying today.
Mission as compared to the version 2 satellites that we currently launch on Falcon. That means that we'll be able to serve more people all around the world with increasingly better high-speed internet. Like all of the Starlink satellites, the V3s are built at Starlink's site in Redmond, Washington, where we already build more satellites than anyone else in the world today. The Starlink V3 sats are designed to support 1 terabit per second of downlink and 160 gigabits per second of uplink capacity. That's approximately a 10 times improvement in downlink capacity and a 22 times increase in uplink capacity from the version 2 Starlink satellite. Serving this capacity to and from customers are the satellite's upgraded phased array antennas. The upgraded phased arrays are fed by SpaceX's in-house developed chips that were designed to serve customers more efficiently in both densely and sparsely populated regions simultaneously. Each Starlink V3 satellite is also equipped with 6 high-capacity 400 gigabit space lasers. These 6 lasers will allow high-bandwidth traffic to flow uninterrupted between any 2 points in the world with redundant paths across a petabit laser mesh network. And if that wasn't enough, the V3s will carry 4 quad-band radio frequency backhaul antennas. These will take advantage of the Ka, E, V, and W communication bands, allowing for an 8 times improvement in the supported capacity compared to our V2 sats. Now that's a lot of growth in capacity and capability, and as such, the new satellite design requires more power. So the solar arrays on V3 will generate approximately twice as much power as the current arrays that we fly on the V2 satellites. And they're also optimized to reduce drag in the lower orbital altitudes in which these satellites will operate. But before we operationalize these satellites, we want to put them in a flight-like environment. So these satellites were just loaded into Starship yesterday ahead of today's launch. And once deployed, the Starlink team will only have about 20 minutes of flight to speed run some tests before the sats demise in the atmosphere. Now, the team will attempt to run tests such as extending the new solar arrays and antennas, connecting with ground stations, and turning on the satellite's communication systems. And this is all part of SpaceX's iterative process to technology advancement. And from the beginning, Starlink was designed to scale rapidly and improve continuously. From production to launch and ground infrastructure, Starlink is uniquely positioned to keep pace with rising demand around the world. In fact, just this week, we rolled out the next generation Starlink kit V5, which is built for reliable, high-speed home internet.
again, cutting away because of music issues there. But sticking with the topic of the Starlink constellation and its role for broader programs, just about 20 or so minutes ago, NASA announced that it had selected SpaceX in order to augment the Artemis 3 mission, not only with its previously announced use of the Starship vehicle to dock with Orion, but SpaceX will also be outfitting Orion with additional capability to transmit 4K views during the mission. NASA will be installing 2 Starlink mini laser terminals onto the Orion spacecraft. This is the same type of optical transmission that they demonstrated back during the From 2 mission that flew the polar orbit back in 2025. NASA had previously announced that they had wanted to add the capability to broadcast 4K video of the Artemis 3 mission during its low Earth orbit flight, and this Starlink capability being added onto the Orion spacecraft will allow them to do that, to downlink that 4K video to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. NASA notes that this is being overseen through a partnership of their SCAN division, which stands for Space Communications and Navigation, and its Communication Services project. Quote, the Artemis 3 laser communications demonstration builds upon the agency's existing agreement with SpaceX, advancing NASA's broader strategy to commercialize satellite relay services for missions operating near Earth, end quote. NASA has been looking for paths to transition from its older aging satellites, both in the near space and the deep space network. And this is just one step and just one partnership as part of that overall plan. Time currently T-minus 13 minutes, 40 seconds and counting as fueling continues on the Starship and Super Heavy booster. The next major milestone in the road to flying this vehicle coming up at T-minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds is when the booster prop load will wrap up. That'll be followed 40 seconds later by ship prop load wrapping up as well. Time now 13 minutes to Flight 13. Taking a look at the trajectory animation for this mission. We showed you a similar one that was from Flight 12. This is specifically to Flight 13. Basically the same. One of the main differences between that animation and this one, though, is that the payload being deployed on this flight are operational Starlink V3 satellites as opposed to the dummy satellites that flew on Flight 12. And let's go ahead and listen into SpaceX's Dan Hewitt for a status update.
Not tracking any issues on the vehicle or the pad side. Range status continues to be green. Reminder, we're tracking the range out in the Gulf off the coast of Starbase where we're launching over, and then also out in the Indian Ocean where we're hopefully sending a Starship in just about 11 minutes from now. Weather looks gorgeous. blue skies, low winds, couple of clouds, not a concern for flight today. And again, the vehicle and the pad both looking great. We are in kind of the latter stages of propellant loading. We got into the go, no go with the flight control team at about T-minus 1 hour. And then we've been loading prop for about, quick math, about 26 minutes now. We're going to continue loading propellant, that's your liquid oxygen, your liquid methane, onto both of these vehicles until just a little over 2 minutes before we lift off. We'll close out on the ship at about 2 minutes and 10 seconds, and on the booster before that at about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. So at the moment, we're looking good. We're counting down to the very top of our window. It was a 90-minute window. It opens right at 5:45 p.m. Central Time. Looking good to hit that right at the top. Back over to you guys.
Thanks, Dan. Now,
Bringing in some video that SpaceX shot of the progress over at Launch Complex 39A as they are continuing towards the completion of their Starship tower at Launch Complex 39A and alongside the Falcon launch tower, which is focusing on Falcon Heavy missions. Taking a look at operations over at Pad 37 as well. If we can go back to that video, guys behind the scenes, thank you. Multiple Starship tower modules have been stacked over at the pad. SpaceX says that tower expects to complete stacking in just a matter of weeks. So potentially by the end of this summer. This is a look at the Gigabay at the Roberts Road site near Hangar X. Working on completing the externals as the main steel structure has completed. Just under 8.5 minutes remaining on the countdown on the road to launch for Starship Flight 13. SpaceX noting that a launch from Florida of Starship may happen this year. I want to bring SpaceX back in here as they're talking about the presence as part of the Artemis 3 mission.
Designed to demonstrate a lot of the critical systems needed for future lunar landings. We've got our astronaut crew, 3 from NASA, 1 from the European Space Agency. Randy Bresnik, Luca Parmitano, Frank Rubio, and Andre Douglas are going to crew that mission slated for 2027. That's going to be the penultimate mission, the final test before Artemis attempts to put astronaut boots back on the moon for the first time since 1972. For our part, we're going to be launching a Starship with a docking port on the nose so we can practice rendezvous and docking with the crew inside of Orion. One of our key test objectives is going to come after docking, where we're going to be able to test out the maneuverability of both vehicles while they're connected. This has some extra importance as the revamp plan for the Artemis landing missions are going to use Starship to do the burn that sends astronauts to the moon from Earth orbit. And one other cool ad that just came out today, NASA is going to be putting 2 SpaceX mini lasers on Orion to connect it to our Starlink constellation, where we already use thousands of lasers today. And they're going to be doing that with the goal of enabling 4K imagery and video from the spacecraft while they're in space. So a lot of of excitement planned for next year as we all work together to send humans back to the moon, begin building a moon base, get to that future where anybody that wants to go to the moon is going to hopefully be able to go to the moon. So lots of really cool stuff to come. For now, though, we're at T-minus 6 minutes, 18 seconds into today's launch, and we're getting into terminal count. So let's zoom in. So range continues to be green. Weather continues to be gorgeous. We are getting into the final stages of propellant loading on both stages of Starship. Again, we're putting liquid oxygen, liquid methane on both the booster and the ship. Ship has main tanks. It also has those small header tanks in the very top and the nose of the vehicle that we're going to fill up. We're going to close out on the ship at about 2 minutes and 10 seconds before launch, and then the booster at about 2 minutes and 50. Once we're completely done prop loading, you've got about 11.5 million pounds of liquid propellant on board both stages. Then we start to get the pad itself ready for launch. We do what's called pushbacks. That's you're clearing out all of those propellant feed lines that have been flowing from the tank farm into the tower, into the vehicles, push it back into the tank farm, and then we also start purging all of those lines with an inert gas, just getting it ready for launch. We'll do final thrust vector steering controls on our Raptor engines at about T-minus 100 seconds and then T-minus 60 seconds. If a hold is needed, shocking change, it's now going to come at T-minus 60 seconds. That's a new time. We've balanced out a couple of our final checks that happened before liftoff, and we moved them a little bit earlier before we start flying, so that time is now at T-minus 60. That's the point where we can pause to wait. We'll only hold there if there's an issue, and we can recycle back.
Minus 60 seconds. A lot of mechanical activations on the tower side as well, with one critical step, unlatching the quick disconnect feeding propellant into the ship.
And once T-minus 60 seconds has passed, there is still the ability to rapidly recycle the count under certain conditions back to that T-minus 60 second hold point. We can hold there and assess what happened and if teams can proceed again to T0. We've got about 5 to 8 minutes of hold time, and that will largely be driven by the propellant temperatures that we see on the vehicle while holding. The flame diverter on pad 2, which you can see the side profile of it there on your screen, that activates at T-minus 17 seconds, and if we trigger a hold after that, it will result in a scrub for the day. So we're now just under 3.5 minutes until liftoff. If you've recently joined, we're planning to deploy 20 of our Starlink V3 satellites. These are real V3s on board, so that's exciting. We also would like to perform a Raptor in-space relay as well.
In the final 3 minutes of the count now, as SpaceX approaches the conclusion of prop load today. Booster prop load will wrap up first, and then ship will end after that. SpaceX not tracking any holds to liftoff. Just under 2 minutes to liftoff. Fall continues to go well. SpaceX concluded prop load. You're seeing the additional venting there at the pad. conducting final checks. 90 seconds to the planned liftoff of Starship Flight 13. Thrust vector control tests. Coming into the final minute of the count. SpaceX not tracking a hold item right now, so we should see them go past the 1 minute mark and progress towards liftoff. 1 minute and counting. And we have a hold triggered. Standing by for further. SpaceX working through some pad checks, working to recycle. Clock is back in motion. "45 seconds. "30 seconds. "15 seconds. And here we go. In about 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Raptor engine ignition, and we have a hold and abort. This, I believe, the first for SpaceX, an engine ignition and an abort at the pad with their Starship rocket for a launch. Standing by for any further from SpaceX. Let's listen in.
Starting to light those Raptor engines. As a reminder, since we already turned the diverter on, we are going to be scrubbed for the day. The team's already starting to pull for offload of both vehicles, so starting to get the prop off. We'll take a little bit of time to look into what triggered that abort. Usually we'll take some data review for all of our teams. But again, we did abort on the startup of the booster. So we weren't tracking any holds moving in to those final seconds into that final minute. But that is going to be a scrub for the day. So the team's now moving into commodity offload. We're going to take the methane and the oxygen off of both Starship and Super Heavy. So not the end result you're looking for, but we've got vehicle there still on the pad, and they're going to get these commodities offloaded. We'll take some time, dig into what triggered that abort once the booster was igniting to launch, and then we'll figure out what our path forward is going to be. Again, if you're just jumping in, we're not going to be launching today. We got all the way down to startup, triggered a hold on the booster, and that shut down the engines right as they were starting to ignite. All right, so at this point, they're going to get into offload. We're going to get all the methane, all the oxygen off the vehicle, and then we'll figure out next steps. So, no Starship launch today. We'll dig in with the teams, figure out what happened, and figure out when our next attempt is going to be. And obviously, we're going to keep you updated as well. So we'll dig into what our recycle time is, when we're going to be able to try again. Be sure to follow us on X at SpaceX. We're going to share updates there as soon as more information becomes available and when we can get back for flying. So thanks for tuning in today. Hopefully, we'll be back real soon for Flight 13 and another.
And an unfortunate end to a launch attempt today. Flight 13 ends with a pad ignition abort, and SpaceX digging into the data now to determine, as you heard from commentator Dan Hewitt, when they will be able to recycle and try again with this mission. The next steps, SpaceX will detank the launch vehicle and start to pour through that data that they did get from the fueling of the rocket, the initial ignition, and we will of course keep you apprised as we learn more about what the next steps are going to be, when the next launch attempt will take place, and what SpaceX has learned about their version 3 Raptor engines, that this was going to be just the second time that one of these had taken flight. The last major milestone before SpaceX launched this, or was going to attempt to launch this mission, was performing a 33 engine static fire of this booster at the pad here. It was then returned to the work site over near the Starbase factory. They did some final checkouts and then rolled the booster here to the pad earlier this week, and then stacked the ship on top and went for a launch attempt today, which unfortunately, as we just saw, ended with a scrub. Do want to thank those of you who've been supporting us with our coverage here today. An unfortunate end to this Flight 13 launch attempt, but certainly thanks to all of you for supporting with the various super chats, and to our wonderful channel members who help make this launch attempt coverage possible. Want to thank our friends over at Avid Space for helping to provide some great views of the Starship rocket, as well as to our Adam Bernstein out on the ground there down at Starbase, and will still be with us for a future attempt, depending on the timing. Of course, we'll work out the logistics on our end, but bring you a wonderful broadcast whenever SpaceX is ready to get back in the saddle on this one. Big thanks to our editor, Stephen Young, and to John Pisani for running the technical operations of this broadcast. Thanks to our moderators in the chat, to Jeff Hansen, M. Teresa, and Jules for helping to hold it down in the chat space, and to channel member Cumulus Granadas for answering folks' questions in the chat. Thanks as well to our guests that we had join us, to Jack Core from Payload, Eric Berger of Ars Technica, and apologies that we didn't get to our final guest, Marina Korn, but we'll look to see if we can get her back for a future launch attempt for Flight 13. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, folks, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time. Until then, bye-bye.